came to visit you. I still remember the time that my grandma had guests. All my brothers always but every time that we had guests, right away they used to start making tortillas and start we would have a meal.
In a sense, that's what we're seeing here. And is they eat together, they have a meal as they come, and they share in this meal. And this is what we would call a fellowship meal. And the sacrifices were what are considered communion sacrifices. The word communion means common union. So when you did, now remember, this is before everything we're going to learn about in the book of Leviticus. Many people think, and we're going to look a little bit in a while, about what is Torah? What is the law? What are the laws? Because everybody today, especially within Christianity, thinks of sacrifices and everything beginning with Moses. No. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, over here, Yitro, a Cohen Midian, a follower of Elohim, a follower of Yahweh, but not under Moshe, not under the Hebrews. And they're doing a communion sacrifice to Yahweh. In fact, watch what it says there. Go with me to verse 12. Then Yitro, Hoten Moshe, offered a holocaust and sacrifices to Elohim. And Aaron came with the elders of Israel to share the meal with the Hoten Moshe in the presence of Elohim. So they do these sacrifices, and then they have a meal. They share in the meal. A holocaust, which that offering was a complete burnt offering to Adonai. But the meal, they come together in fellowship. And he blesses Adonai, he blesses Yahweh. And he gives Yahweh all the glory. And in fact, in verse 11 it says, now I know that Yahweh is greater than all the Elim, all the gods. This Cohen Midian acknowledges Yahweh as greater than all the Elim. He is the King of kings. He's the Elohim of Elim. He's the Adonai of Adonim. He is the great. And so this meeting between Jethro and Moshe turns out to really be a good time of fellowship between the Hoten, the Hotim, which would be the in-laws, the father-in-law and the son-in-law, and being able to have that time together. But the following day, verse 13, Moshe took his seat to administer justice for the people, and from morning until evening they stood around him, observing what labors he took on himself for the people's sake. The Hoten Moshe, the father-in-law of Moses, said to him. Now, it says here that Moshe took his seat. How many have ever heard of the term cathedral? What is a cathedral? Many people think that a cathedral is a giant church, a big church. In fact, there was a little storefront building in the South Valley that was called the Cathedral of something, and people would say, look, this is just a storefront. Why do they call it a cathedral? It's just a little building. A cathedral should be this big, massive building. The word cathedral comes from the word kather, and that word means a seat. It is the seat of the person who is in charge, the person who, in a cathedral, Catholic cathedral, it's the seat where the bishop seats. We have one here. It's that, you see that chair right there? That big chair over there? That is called the bishop's chair or the pastor's chair. And most, when we moved into our church, it was over here, and the pastor would sit on it, and he'd have his different people sitting next to him. A seat is where the bishop seats. In fact, when a teacher in biblical times taught, or when judgment was done, the person who was doing the judging, the person that was doing the judging and the teaching would sit down. So a cathedral is the place where the bishop or archbishop's chair of authority is. The chair means the authority. If a judge sits on the chair, on the bench, we call it, he's on the bench. He has authority. He could do whatever he wants, and once he says, puts the gavel down and, contempt of court, get out of court, or whatever. Moshe is sitting on a chair of authority, an authority that Adonai had already given him. Remember, on the way over here, Adonai gave Moshe mishpatim and chukim. Remember that? He says, I lay on you mishpatim and chukim. He gives them laws, rules. They already knew what the rules were. In fact, it's important, especially today, for us to understand that the Torah was not given on Mount Sinai. The Torah is the instruction of Adonai, we're going to see. And that started in Genesis 1:1. The Torah begins in Genesis 1:1, not in Exodus 20. The word Torah means the instruction, the doctrine, the teaching of Elohim to his people. And that teaching began with Adam, as Adonai gave to Adam, and Adam wrote down, and Seth wrote down, and Noah wrote down, and everybody wrote down their stories, their toldot. Remember, we're talking about toldot here in several. The stories of. And so all these combined stories are the beginning of Torah. Genesis 1 through 11 is the origin stories, the origin toldot. And Adonai gave us instructions from the beginning. Some of those instructions were written down. Some of those instructions were just passed on orally. The Sabbath was one of the first instructions that Adonai told us. On the Sabbath day, he ceased from his labor. There was mishpatim, there was rules, and there was orders and decrees for sacrifices given to Adam. Adam was taught how to sacrifice and when to sacrifice. And we know that because the next story is of Cain and Abel. And what are Cain and Abel doing? Cain, the farmer, Abel, the herdsman, on the day of first fruits. On the day of first fruits. How do we know it was the day of first fruits? How did they know it was the day of first fruits? They came to sacrifice. And Abel sacrifices the best, the first lamb and the fat as well. But it says that Cain came and he sacrificed, he gave just some grain, probably the leftover grain. And Adonai was blessed with the sacrifice of Abel, but he did not accept the sacrifice of Cain. The first murder occurred because of what will later become a Levitical law. The first murder took place because one followed a mishpatim and the other one didn't. But there was mishpatim about that. Adam kept kosher. Cain and Abel kept kosher. Maybe Cain went for some chicharrones every once in a while. I don't know. But they kept kosher. Noah kept kosher. Noah only ate animals that were clean. Because remember, Adonai, when he created the world, he created the animals. He created unclean animals. And the reason he created unclean animals, all the unclean birds, unclean land animals, unclean fish animals, were to be environmental cleaners. Noah kept kosher. How do we know? Because Adonai tells Noah, you shall take 2 of every unclean animal, but 7 pairs of every clean animal. Wait a second. How did Noah know what was clean and unclean? Because Adonai had shown Adam, Cain and Abel. When Abel sacrificed, what did he sacrifice? A clean animal. When Noah sacrificed after the flood, it says Noah sacrificed of all the clean animals. In fact, let me ask you a question. When Adam and Eve were dressed, do you think they were dressed in pigskin? No. Adonai sacrificed the first sacrifice. The first sacrifice was by Adonai. He did the first sacrifice. And with the skins of the animal, we are told, Adonai clothed Adam and Eve. I don't think that was pigskin. I believe that was goat skin or lamb skin or calf skin. The reason we know that is because Adonai is the same yesterday, today, and forever. From the beginning of time to the end of time, Adonai is going to do the same thing. And when he gave us in the Mishpatim and Chukim of Moshe, which we're going to start learning next week, it's always clean animals that we are to eat, that we are to sacrifice. And so Moses came, he took his seat to administer justice. By this time, Moses had a set of what we would call casual law, case law. case law, casual law, is made up of all the laws that have been enacted from the beginning up to this time. And it says that he come and take his seat to administer justice. Shafat, to be a judge and to administer justice, to weigh. And he's doing it because it says for the people, and from morning till evening they stood around him. Now remember, we're talking over 1 million people. Now, how many of you have ever had a dispute with someone? How many of you have ever had a dispute with a fellow church member? How many of you have ever had a dispute? And when you have a dispute, when you walk in the flesh, you'll take off. You'll leave, disgruntleism. You become disgruntled about this, you become disgruntled about that. In families, there's divorces, there's separations, running away from home. The flesh just wants to split. But what Adonai wants to do in the Spirit is administer justice. Administer justice. And administering justice is finding out what is the just thing, who did right, who did wrong, who is the offender, who is the offended. And you look, later on we're going to be told, when you get judges, make sure that they are just judges. And it says there, verse 15, Moses answered Yitro, "Why are you doing this, mijo?" he says. "Why are you doing this, my son-in-law? You're going to wear yourself out and wear the people." Because remember, the people that don't get justice or don't have time, they're going to get frustrated. Then they're going to have a problem with you. Moses answered his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to bring me their inquiries to Elohim." Inquiries, their prayers. Darash. When they have some dispute, they come to me, and I settle the differences between the one and the other, and instruct them in Elohim's statutes and his decision. Mishpatim Chukim. There they are. I instruct them on the Mishpatim and Chukim. This is that set of law from Adam, that Adonai gave to Adam, to Seth, to Shem, to everybody down the line through Abraham. Because we know we don't have time, but we've dealt with this before. That it says, Abraham kept my Torah. Abraham was a Torah. Well, how could Abraham be a Torah keeper if the Torah hadn't been given? No, the Torah had already started with Adam. And it had been grown, it grew, and it was added onto. The main thing that we call Torah is actually from Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. But the Torah was given from Genesis 1:1. The teaching, the instruction, the ways of Adonai. And so Moshe gets all these Mishpatim, Chukim, and he has classes to the people. He teaches the people. He instructs the people. And because they're instructed, when they have a dispute with one another or they have a question, they come to Moshe. Now we do the same thing over here. By the way, on Wednesday nights, I would invite you, any Wednesday night, if any of you, especially you who are visitors, if you or you know anybody has any Bible question, they could come on Wednesday night, and Wednesday night we could talk about any question that you guys want. Any question. If you have a question, bring it up publicly, and we will talk about it. Because in this congregation, I believe that anything that is in Torah should be publicly. There is no question that is a dumb or stupid question. There is no question that there's nothing that I teach that is secret. You know, there are no secret teachings that only those that are wise can know. Nothing like that. It's all public. In fact, there's congregations, even Messianic congregations, that only allow certain people to come. And they have secret meetings. Yeah, some of them are public. They say we're public, but you go there and they kind of push you away if you're not part of that, of their group. No, everything here should be public. You're all welcome to ask any question. And I'm going to tell you something. I know all the answers. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know. Like the other day. Someone asked me a question and I had to say, you know what? I don't know. Now, I used to know the answers. By the way, there was a time when I knew all the answers when I got out of Bible school, seminary, and all that. When you get your doctor's degree, and you know everything. Then Adonai has to slap you around sometimes and put you to the ground. And then now you're saying, well, you know what? I don't know that. In fact, it's in this verse where it says that Moshe, that after Sephora had been dismissed, and the question came up, dismissed? Did he divorce her? Did he kick her out? No, he just sent her to go give information to Otero. But a lot of people say, I don't know. Okay, let's go on. And so he says there, you will tire yourself out, verse 18, and the people with you. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Take my advice. Now here's some father-in-law advice. I would encourage all son-in-laws to take father-in-law advice. Joe, where's Joe? Take my advice, and Elohim will be with you. You ought to represent the people before Elohim and bring their disputes to him. In other words, when the people bring their disputes to you, his thing is, well, take that dispute to Adonai. In other words, prayer. Moshe, pray about it. Don't just, if they have a dispute to you, bring your dispute, bring those disputes to Adonai, and let Adonai, in a sense, instruct you. Then he goes on to say, teach them the statutes and the decisions, show them the haderech, the way, show them the haderech, the way that they must follow and what their course must be. In other words, don't spend all that time on the bench, on the seat. Okay, next case, case 359 on the docket for today. No, nothing like that. Bring the disputes to Adonai, write them down, and bring them to Adonai, and then teach the people. So Moshe's responsibility is to be more of a teacher than a judge. More of a teacher than a judge. He's been spending all these days, can you imagine, from leaving Egypt on the way there, just spending time judging and judging and judging. But he's supposed to teach Moreh. Teach them. Throw out the statutes, the mishpatim. You know what? Most of the problems that people have most of the problems that I've had, that you have, we do not need counseling. Most people don't need counseling. You know what they need? Repentance. Most people don't need their disputes settled by someone else. What they need is humility. If you have a dispute with someone and someone's done something to you, don't run away. Don't leave this congregation for another congregation, because the same thing will happen over there. Same thing will happen at the workplace. Same thing will happen at school. Disputes will happen everywhere. Why? Because we're humans. And humans love the flesh, and the flesh loves controversy. And the flesh loves, I'm right and you're wrong. And the flesh loves, you did that to me, I'm going to do it to you. That's people walking in the flesh. The works of the flesh are evident. Divisions, controversy. Oh, you know Galatians. But the fruit of the Spirit. Especially we who have been baptized by the Holy Spirit. Those of us that have been filled with the Holy Spirit. These people had the Mishpatim and Hukim, but they hadn't been baptized with the Holy Spirit, and yet Adonai is teaching them to follow the Mishpatim. How much more us that are Spirit-filled? We should be walking in the Spirit, not in the flesh. And yet controversy still exists in every congregation. Splits occur, situations occur. Even people sitting on this side to people sitting on that side. Well, I'll sit on the other side. I don't want to sit by that. That's the flesh. And it was the flesh that was reigning here on the way to receive the covenant. Not receive the Torah, but receive the covenant. Remember, receive the covenant. The Torah, we've been receiving already since Adam. But choose people, capable men, Elohim-fearing men, trustworthy, incorruptible. Appoint them as leaders of the people and share your work. And Moshe did that. And that was the origin of what we call the Beit Din. The Beit Din. Everybody say Beit Din. The word Beit Din means the house of judgment, or the courthouse. The Beit Din means the courthouse. And since this time, Israel has had a courthouse. Since the time of Moshe and Yitro, it's had a courthouse, a Beit Din. In New Testament times, it was called the Sanhedrin. And every congregation must have a courthouse. And every congregation must have a courthouse, and there should be at least 3 men on that court. In this congregation, we have the same thing. In fact, can our elders who are in the Beit Din stand up? David and Hermano Camargo, Gilbert, Hermano, he's not here. We have 4 men here that sit on the Beit Din. If any dispute would occur, these 4 men, including myself as the tiebreaker, would be able to look at the dispute, bring the dispute, you may take your seats, bring the dispute before Adonai, pray, and bring a judgment. Look for justice. Can you imagine what we do here in this? And if anyone has a dispute, if you have a dispute, if you have a problem with anything or anyone, I would encourage you to talk to Dave Estrada. Dave Estrada would be our, he is the second here at the congregation. And bring it up to him. He would bring it to me. We would get together and do that. We have to do this. From this time, Adonai is calling us to do this. There's a lot of congregations that don't do this. A lot of them do. But we need to follow this. Then Moshe's father-in-law went back home. Another time, he comes back again, and Moshe tells him, come on, stay with us, go to Israel with us. But he says, no, I have to go. But so he stays in his own country. At this point, he goes, go with me to chapter 19, verse 1. Now, we have a little bit of a problem here, because the Hebrew says one thing and tradition says another thing. Now, do you follow what the word says or tradition? Well, we're going to follow the word. Chapter 19, verse 1 says, and in the Hebrew it says this: 3 months after they came out of the land of Egypt, on that day the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sinai. So they were at Rephaim, where they got water, where Adonai blessed, where Yitro met them. They leave Rephaim, now they come to the wilderness of Sinai, the Midvar Sinai. And they're here in front of the mountain. By the way, this picture is a modern picture. Those guys aren't ancient Israelites. These are modern tourists on the same mountain. You can see their backpacks, and you can see their these are modern guys on a tour of Sinai. This is the way Sinai looks even today. And they're up there. Israel comes to the wilderness of Sinai. And it says 3 months after. Now, one translation says, on the 3rd month to the day. There's some people that believe that this occurred right before what Shavuot would be. How many of you have ever heard that the law was given to Israel on Pentecost or on Shavuot? You ever hear that? A lot of people teach that. That's wrong. Shavuot, there was no Shavuot at this time. Remember, Shavuot is not given till Leviticus 23. And Shavuot, actually, 50 days had already occurred in Rephaim when Adonai gives the manna. Adonai gave us bread from heaven. Remember, we were talking about bread from heaven. And on Shavuot, what do we bless? 2 loaves of bread. Bread, signifying thank you, Adonai, for physical bread. Give us this day our daily bread. Blessing of the wheat harvest. It's a not a religious holiday, holy day. It is a agricultural holy day. But modern rabbinical, and just to let everybody know, we are not a rabbinical congregation. We are a Mosaic, Messianic, and Apostolic congregation. And we don't follow the rabbinical Jewish calendar. And I would encourage no one to follow the rabbinical Jewish calendar because it's set up by man. Like the Christian Gregorian calendar is set up by man, the Jewish rabbinical calendar is set up by man, and we need to go back to Scripture. But so that they could make the giving of the Torah, or the giving of the covenant, from my point of view, to coincide with a holiday, they had to change the numbers on that very day. So 3 months later, it took them 3 months to get from Egypt to Sinai. And then they arrive here, and they're facing the mountain, and Moses is told, verse 3, Moses went up to Elohim. Yahweh called him from the mountain, saying, say this to the house of Israel, declare this to the sons of Israel. You yourself have seen what I did to Egyptians, how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. From this you know, if you obey my voice and hold fast to my covenant, you of all nations, if, okay, first of all, Adonai is going to give the covenant. Everybody say the covenant. Not the Torah. Remember, I make a distinction between the giving of the Torah to Adam to this point and all the way to Deuteronomy. But Adonai is going to make a covenant with Israel. Adonai is going to make a covenant with Israel. But it's a conditional covenant. The Abrahamic covenant and the subsequent covenants with Isaac and Jacob and all the promises to the 12 sons were all unconditional. Unconditional covenants. Because even if Abraham and his sons do not fulfill the conditions of the covenant, Adonai will fulfill his part. But in this case, once you have the word if, it makes it conditional. If you obey my voice, if you hold fast to my covenant, you of all nations will be my very own. Now, most people, as we're going to see, call this the Mosaic covenant or the Sinai covenant. No, this is the Israelite covenant. This is the covenant to Israel, a covenant with Israel, the people of Elohim, and everyone that has joined Israel. Because remember, at this point, Israel is made up of the 12 tribes and Gentiles from many nations, the mixed multitude. So those Gentiles that left Egypt with Moshe and the Israelite genetic people have now been grafted into Israel, and they also are a part of Israel, and the covenant applies to them also if they obey the voice of Elohim, if they keep the covenant, if they follow his way. You will be my own people, my own possession. But what happens if they don't? If they don't, you are not the people of Elohim. If you follow, you are his people. If you don't follow, you are not his people. If you come on Wednesday night, we'll expand this even more, because we're going to talk about how Paul in Romans 9, 10, 11 says, not all Israel is Israel. And people that are Gentiles who follow Adonai even today are more Israel than many Jews who do not follow Israel. The majority of Jews today are not Israel. They're genetically, but they are not his people because they are not following the covenant. And by the way, the covenant that Adonai has today is not the Israelite covenant, it is the new covenant, the renewed covenant, the Brit Hadashah. So any Jew that is not in cahoots with the Brit Hadashah, any Gentile that is not in cahoots with the Brit Hadashah, is not Israel and is not the people of Elohim. But any Jew who is in cahoots with it, any Gentile who is in cahoots in it, regrafted and grafted, are part of the people of Elohim, Israel. That means every one of you here is. I will count you as a kingdom of priests, a royal priesthood. Here's where the royal priesthood, today a lot of people say, well, we are a royal priesthood, a holy nation of people. This is where it comes from. But watch, it's conditional. It's conditional. If you're not following the way of Yahweh, if you're not following his covenant, if you're not part of, you're not a holy people, you're not a royal priesthood, you're not a holy nation. It takes observance, and not rabbinical observance, but Mosaic observance, biblical observance. A consecrated nation. A goy kadosh. A goy kadosh. The word goy means a nation. The goyim are the nations. But Israel, singular, goy, is a goy kadosh, a holy nation, a set apart nation. Different from all the nations of the world are common nations. Common nations. But Israel is a set apart nation. But Israel does not only have geographical borders, but is made up of the people of Elohim. In other words, Israel, the country of Israel today, the state of Israel, is a common country. Common. Like all the nations of the world, part of the United Nations, it's a common state. Like the United States. There's no difference between Israel today and the United States. But throughout the world and in the coming days, what we call the land of Israel today is going to be the Israel of Elohim. And that's when it says all Israel will be saved. When all Israel will be saved, then Israel will be the Israel of Elohim and will become the Goy Gadol, Goy Kadosh again. And that's in the millennium. And it's in the millennium that all the 12 tribes will be reunited. By the way, don't listen to anybody who calls himself an Ephraimite or a two-houser. That is false doctrine. There is no such thing as Israelites today. The 10 tribes aren't gathered. We showed a film on Wednesday night. I wish every one of you could have been here. We only had like 8 people, but it's an important film of locating the actual lost 10 tribes that are in India, Burma, Afghanistan, Pakistan, not in Europe, not in England, not in France or Germany. Or a lot of people are coming up with, oh, England is Ephraim. No, England is not Ephraim. That's a bunch of baloney. Okay. So Moses went and summoned the elders, putting them all that Yahweh had bidden him. And the people answered, all that Yahweh has said, we will do. And Moses took the people's reply back to Yahweh. By the way, Moses goes up, Moses comes out. Moses goes up, Moses comes down. Moses goes up. He goes up and down so many times, man. He must have lost a lot of weight. He must have been a strong guy. But watch this. Adonai says, if you keep my covenant, I will do this, 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 and this for you. And the people says, all you said we will do. In other words, watch how humble the Israelites are at this point. What Adonai says is, I'm going to give you a covenant. I want you to sign on the dotted line. He puts like a contract. Can you imagine doing a contract today where it says contract between party of the first part and party of the second part? And then it's a blank page, and then you sign your name to it. And then you give it to the guy who's making a covenant with you and say, I accept the covenant that you give me. It's blank. None of us would ever do that, right? None of us would ever do that. Because he could put whatever he wants. Well, that's exactly what Israel did. Israel gave Yahweh a blank check, a blank covenant. They signed their name. Everything you say we will do before reading the covenant. Before reading. By the way, a covenant is almost like a contract, but it's better. It's more powerful than a contract. A covenant is an agreement between two people that if one of the parties to the covenant breaks it, the other party is liable and must keep it. A contract is different than that. A contract is an agreement between two people that if one party breaks it, the other one is not liable for their part no more. The other party is free from any liability. That's a contract. Adonai did not make a contract with Israel. Adonai made a covenant with Israel. And the covenant that he made it, and he's liable to keep it. But watch this. Israel signed on the dotted line before the whereas in modern contracts. Israel signed it. They said, we will do whatever you said we will do. Another place they said, whatever you said we and our children will do. So it made us, the descendants of Israel, liable also. And so what happens is now Yahweh prepares and promises that covenant to Israel, tells them that Israel is going to be that chosen possession, that royal priesthood, that holy nation. And now he calls on Israel to prepare for the covenant. Now, remember, this is the most special thing that Adonai is going to do. Yes, the crossing of the Red Sea was powerful, but this is where we as the people of Elohim, we as Israel, become a nation. And so there's preparation. The first thing he says, I'm coming to you in a dense cloud. People may hear and I speak to you. They must prepare themselves today and tomorrow. Let them wash their clothing. Let them be held in readiness for the third day. By the way, the third day happens many times throughout Scripture. Adonai wants complete consecration, setting apart. Even washing of their clothing. When they come before, when they stand before, as they're standing right there, all their clothing had to be clean. This teaches us something that in Western culture we're not really concerned with. Because, hey man, we follow that, sometimes that Hawaii, you could come to church the way. In fact, some churches advertise, come as you are. Adonai doesn't want us to come as we are. He wants us to come consecrated. He even says, wash your clothes. This is where we get the Sunday duds from. The Sabbath duds. The holy day duds. When people, it used to be that when people came to meet with Adonai, they came with the best. Today, everybody comes what is right in their own eyes. Remember where that comes from. I do my thing type of a situation. No, Adonai wants us. In fact, he even said to separate yourself from your wife. The husbands and the wives had to separate for those 3 days and not be together for those 3 days. So you could be concentrating, constantly setting yourself apart. And nobody was to come near. Everybody, there was boundaries set. The people weren't to come near. Moshe, Yehoshua, even some of the elders were allowed to go, but some of them only halfway, only Moshe to the top. It was a sacred time. It was a holy time. Adonai is going to give his covenant. Adonai is going to give his covenant. And he goes up and down several times. Verse 16, at daybreak on the third day, there was peals of thunder, and the mountain flashes of lightning, a dense cloud, and a loud shofar. The blast of the shofar inside the camp, all the people trembled. Then Moshe led the people out of the camp to meet Elohim, and they stood at the bottom of the mountain. The mountain of Sinai was entirely wrapped in smoke, because Yahweh had descended on it in the form of fire, like smoke from the furnace. Smoke went up, and the mountain shook violently. Louder and louder grew the sound of the shofar. Moshe spoke, and Elohim answered him with peals of thunder. Yahweh came down on the mountain of Sinai, on the mountaintop, and Yahweh called Moshe to the top of the mountain, and Moshe goes up. And again, he goes up and down, up and down. And all the priests who were the firstborn of Israel at that time, this was before the Cohen, all the priests who were the firstborn met with him. And Moses went down, verse 25, Moses went down, and the people spoke to him. Now, this is a holy time. This is a time when all the people are in fear. You are there, and the mountain's there, and it's smoking and lightning and trembling. Minor earthquakes are taking place. The sound of the shofar is louder and louder, and the people have fear, have reverence, have awesomeness. This is an awesome time. And at that very moment, Yahweh started speaking. Yahweh started speaking. And when he was speaking, now remember, this is not Cecil B. DeMille. This is not the movie The Ten Commandments. All that is a bunch of fairy tales. Moses, Moses wasn't up the mountain hiding in the cleft of the rock like Cecil B. DeMille said. Look what it says. Look what verse 19:25 says. Moses went down to the people and spoke to them. Verse 1 of chapter 20, then Elohim spoke these words, and he said, Did everyone get a paper? Did everyone get? If you didn't get one, can you raise your hand? They'll give you one. Where are they at? Can somebody get some in the back and pass them out to those that need? Okay. Yeah, there's some paper. Raise your hands, and you'll get them. This is my interpretation. I always said that a translation is an interpretation. This is the way I interpret it. No place are they called the 10 Commandments. They're actually called the 10 words. And in Hebrew, the word 10 words is Asaret Chadevarim. Chadevarim, that reminds you of the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is actually the second Torah, the second saying of the words, because it's repeated in what we call the 10 Commandments is repeated in Deuteronomy. These are called the 10 words, the Asaret Chadevarim. And Elohim spoke all these words, and he said, Ani Yahweh, I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, where you had lived as slaves. You shall have no other gods before my face. And the Hebrew says, before my face. You shall not make yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them and serve them, for I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am a jealous Elohim. And I punish the parents' fault in the children, the grandchildren, and the great-grandchildren among those who hate me. But I act with faithful love towards thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of Yahweh your Elohim, for Yahweh will not leave unpunished anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath for Yahweh your Elohim. You shall do no work that day, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your servants, men and women, nor your animals, nor the alien living with you. For in 6 days Yahweh made the heavens and the earth, and the sea, and all that these contain. But on the seventh day he rested. That is why Yahweh has blessed the Sabbath day and made it sacred. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land that Yahweh your Elohim has given you. You shall not kill. Actually, you shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false evidence against your neighbor. You shall not set your heart on your neighbor's house. You shall not set your heart on your neighbor's spouse or servant, man or woman, or ox or donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's possession. These are the 10 words. This is the covenant. Now, what I like you to do, I like you to get a pen. Get a pen. And I want you to sign your name to the covenant. Sign your name to the covenant. In other words, we will accept these 10 words. Not the 9 suggestions, as many people talk about the 9 suggestions. Well, the Sabbath, that's done away with. I'll follow all that because all that is. But the Sabbath is a ceremonial law. I won't follow the ceremonial law. No, it's not. Because this is Adonai's day of rest, day of ceasing. The Sabbath is his day that he ceased from his labor, and we honor that. This is the covenant. When people talk about Torah. When people talk about the law, the Old Testament, the New Testament, most people really don't know what they're talking about. When we talk about the Israel covenant, I know people call it the Mosaic covenant because Adonai did give it to Moses, and even in Exodus and Leviticus it says, the covenant of Moses. The Tanakh talks about the covenant of Moses. Yes, Adonai gave it to Moses, but remember what we just read. Adonai told the sons of Israel, if you keep my covenant, sons of Israel, you will be a holy nation, a royal priesthood, a peculiar people. So the covenant was made with Israel by the hand of Moshe in Sinai. So that's sometimes it's called the Sinaitic or the Sinai covenant. But what is Torah? This is not Torah. These are 10 words that are in the Torah. But the Torah is everything from Genesis 1:1 to Deuteronomy, to the end of Deuteronomy. That's Torah. That's the instruction. And the Torah even goes to the end of the Tanakh and to the end of the book of Revelation, because Adonai is still instructing us through his Son and his apostles. What is the law? The law, the word law, and I hope, I really pray that we need a set of scriptures. And I know there's all these messianic scriptures, the scriptures, but nobody really translates them. Everybody still translates the word law, translates Torah as law. The word law means mishpatim and hukim. Mishpatim and hukim are in Torah. There are mishpatim and hukim, there are laws in Torah, but Torah is not the law. Torah is the instruction, the teachings. And in his instructions and his teachings, there are laws, there are mishpatim, hukim, idot. There are different mishpat. But the Torah is not that. The Torah is above that. By the way, I hope everybody has come to the position already that we don't use Old Testament and New Testament no more. Do not use Old and New Testament. In fact, in your Bibles, white it out. Go buy some white out after, not afterwards, the Sabbath. Tomorrow. You thought you caught me, huh? And white it out. The term Old Testament started in around 135 by a Catholic bishop by the name of Marcion. And Marcion had this idea that the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Hebrews, was a bad God. And the God of us now, the Christians, is a good God. And anything that had to do with Israel, he was anti-Semitic. He says that's the Old Testament. And where he gets the word testament, remember, they were Latins. They weren't Hebrews. They weren't Jewish. They weren't Greek. They were Latins. And the Latin word testamentum means a last will. A last will. A last will and testament. How many of you have a last will and testament? So here's the concept where the word Old and New Testament come in. If you get married and your wife, you make a will, when I die, everything goes to my wife. My house goes to my wife, my car goes to my wife, My yacht goes to my wife, and my, everything goes to my wife. Okay? And your will, your testament says it goes to her. So she keeps that paper. She keeps that paper. But then you get a divorce and you get married to someone else. Well, guess what you're going to do? You're going to go to the judge and say, my new wife gets my house, gets my yacht, gets my car, gets everything. And then you die. Your first wife cannot bring her will and testament to the judge and say, I want my stuff, because the judge will say, that's old, that's obsolete. When you make a new last will and testament, the new last will and testament supersedes the first one, the old one. That's obsolete. Old there means obsolete. Well, guess what Marcion thought? Adonai made a testament. Remember, he's looking from Latin testamentum, not from Brit, Hebrew, because he's not studying it in Hebrew, he's studying it in Latin. And he said, God made a testament with Israel, and he divorced them. So therefore, that's obsolete, and that's an Old Testament. So therefore, that's not to be used. Now, God made a New Testament, a new will, with the Catholic Church, with the Christians, because they were the only ones at the time there. He made a new covenant, a New Testament with the church. Therefore, this is what we have to follow. This is the New Testament. In fact, as he was reading, he said, oh, Matthew sounds too much like Jews. So he kicked Matthew, Mark, and John out. He only kept Luke. And then he kicks 1 Peter, 2 Peter, 1 John, 2 John. He kicks all those out. Only has Luke and some of Paul's letters. And that's the New Testament. That was in 135. So the term Old Testament and New Testament are modern terms that, by the way, this guy got so bad because he was kicking all these books out that even the Catholic Church had problems with him, and they excommunicated, they kicked him out. And that's when the church actually said, these are the books that we follow, which is what is followed in what we call the apostolic writings, what they call the New Testament. The Old Testament we call the Tanakh, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. So when I say the word Tanakh, that means what they misuse as Old Testament. There is no Old Testament. Okay, let's get back to this. What many people say is that this is the Old Covenant. So they say this, and they get white out, and they white out the Sabbath. And of course, the other 9 have become suggestions because some churches don't follow the covenant. Are you in covenant with Yahweh? This is the covenant that Yahweh made through Moshe and gave to Israel. Now, how many of you have kept this perfectly? All 10? 9? 5? 1? We've all broken it, right? Watch this. Watch this. Because we broke the covenant. If you keep, have we kept it? Nope. We're liable. And what's the liability? The soul that sins, it shall die. So therefore, every one of us is liable for death for not keeping this. We're liable for death. And every one of us has a record of debt. It used to be that the books, the scrolls were open, it says in the book of Revelation, and the angels record in scrolls. Now they're using micro processors, iPads or whatever. I don't know what they're using nowadays. But they used to, it says, everyone whose name was not written in the scroll. And they were judged according to the works that they had done in the scrolls. And so, Richard Chavez, Richard Cottrell, Kenny, and every one of us is going to stand before Adonai with a record of our debt. But watch this. Yeshua, the book of Colossians says, took our record of debt. He nailed it to the cross. And when he nailed it to the cross, and remember, when a prisoner, a Roman prisoner, was a murderer or a thief or whatever, they would write on a parchment what his offense was. And they would put it in the jail cell. And we've been to those jail cells underneath the street, underneath the city of Jerusalem, where these people were kept. And when they paid their 9 months, their 10 months, their 10 years, they were given the thing signed, paid in full, tetelestai. Tetelestai, paid in full, and they could go. But if they deserved death, they actually got that record of debt that they owed, and they put it on the crucifixion on the top. When Yeshua died, Richard's record of debt, Lester's record of debt, even Phil's record of debt, my record of debt, your record of debt, was put on the cross. This is what we owed. We owed to die. The soul that sins, the soul that breaks the covenant, it shall die. And Yeshua on the cross took upon him our debt. He who knew no sin became sin, that those who knew no righteousness might become the righteousness of Elohim, Paul says. And on that cross, Yeshua took our record that we had broken, the 10 words that we had broken. And remember, this is the covenant. This is what we broke. Yeah, there's so-called 316 commandments. No. This is the covenant. This is the covenant that we broke. Just 10. Just 10. And we've broken them all. Thought, word, in deed, we've broken them all. But remember, at Passover, our people were redeemed from Pharaoh, from Egypt, by the blood of the Lamb. Keeping the 10 commandments does not save us. No one will be saved by keeping the 10 words. We've actually not kept them, but there's people trying to keep them for salvation. In fact, there's people trying to keep the 613 for salvation. People are trying to do all kinds of things for salvation. No, by faith are we saved. By grace are we saved through faith, not of our own, not by keeping 10 phrases, 10 words. We were redeemed from Egypt, from Pharaoh. But then we were brought to Sinai, and at Sinai we were given the covenant, and what this means is this is how a redeemed person lives. Now we have been redeemed. We've been bought by Yeshua. But that doesn't make this obsolete. This is how we still live. Now, we still break it. No one that has ever been saved, no person that has ever been baptized, from the moment of their baptism, from the moment of their salvation, has lived a perfect life. True? And that's where teshuvah, that's where confession, that's where repentance comes in. If we say we don't sin, we are calling Elohim a liar. But if we confess our sin, then He is faithful and just to forgive us our sin and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So when people talk about the Old Testament, they're usually thinking of the 39 books. The 39 books are not the Old Testament. The 39 books are not the Old Testament. Now, this is not the Old Testament. This is the ancient covenant. Ancient covenant. Ancient covenant. An ancient covenant is not an Old Testament. This is ancient. This is paleo. This is archaic. Now, Yeshua, through actually Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 31:31 says, "Behold, the days are coming when I will renew the covenant. When I will give you a Brit Chadashah, a renewed covenant." Renewed. Not like the one I gave to you at the mountain. No, this is the covenant I will make with you. I will put my Torah in your heart. My covenant will be in your heart. This covenant, and the whole Torah should be in every one of our hearts. Is this in your heart? And in fact, this paper, I wish you would Xerox 100 copies. If every one of you would Xerox 100 copies and give them to all your family and friends. And tell them, this is the covenant that Adonai made with Israel. And this is the covenant that Yeshua paid for. We've broken it. Yeshua paid. And now this is the covenant that Yeshua renews by His death. And when He took the cup, this is the cup of the new covenant on Pesach. In my blood, in my death, Yeshua took it. But now, as a redeemed people, we go to follow His way. It's called the Decalogue in English, the 10 words. Asarar Chadevarim. And what we were going to do is we're going to go through each one. But I'll just close with this. Was the giving of the 10 words on Shavuot? And the answer is no. Because remember, today we saw that it wasn't as Siso B. DeMille. Today we saw that Yahweh spoke the 10 words from the mountain. We're going to see next week that the 10 words are written on a scroll by Moses. And then we're going to see that the 10 words were inscribed by Adonai in stone. And then we're going to see that they were inscribed a second time by Adonai in stone. So the 10 words were given first, spoken orally, audibly from the mountaintop, with Moses downstairs. And then Moses goes up, we're going to see, and Adonai says, write the 10 words on the scroll. And he does, and he gives it to the people. He reads it to the people from a scroll. And then Adonai says, now come up the mountain and I will give you it. He spends 40 days up there. And then he comes down, he breaks them, and he goes another 40 days. Shavuot is long gone by any of these times. So no, the 10 words, the 10 commandments were not given at Shavuot. But many people in Messianic circles or rabbinic circles follow that tradition. But it's just a tradition, remember, it's just a tradition. Let's go ahead and stand. Father, we thank you for the opportunity that we have to just give a drash, a little commentary on some of these scriptures. We pray that your people will take what they heard and go home and search the scriptures to see if these things be so. I pray, Father, that the people would, your people here, Israel, as they stand before you, would continue their studies. We ask that you might do a mighty work in their lives. Yevarechecha Yahweh va'ish merecha, A'ir Yahweh panav elecha v'chunecha, Asa Yahweh panav elecha, vayasem lecha shalom. May Yahweh bless you and keep you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May Yahweh lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Shalom, shalom. You may take your seats for a moment.
Shabbat Shalom. I thought this story started December 13th on a Friday, but then I realized that the provision of the Father had gone on before that. Laura Metzger had offered to help with the women's Hebrew class, and the first Sunday in December we both taught the class. The second Sunday Laura was on her own, because in the meantime I had wakened up on that Friday morning unable to stand or walk steadily by myself. So that day Gilbert and I spent from 11 o'clock to 4 in the afternoon at Casement ER. There was an EKG shortly after I got there. There was a CAT scan, and no real drastic happening showed up. I made the mistake of describing how I felt as being dizzy or experiencing vertigo. So I went home with Valium and Antivert, which made for a few solid nights' sleep. But when I went to my primary's assistant and explained to her I wasn't dizzy, no rooms were spinning, but I just felt like my right arm and leg were not under my control. She made a fast trip down the hall to the doctor, and when she came back, I had an appointment with the neurologist the following afternoon. I had an MRI Friday morning. The MRI showed that there was a mild stroke in the periventricular white matter adjacent the occipital horn of the left lateral ventricle. Right about here. So I'd always been, over time, fearful of a stroke and the harm it would cause, because we watched one of our grandmothers lose the ability to walk and speak after a stroke. She had one word left. Grandma Maddie used the word wonder 100 ways. She must have wondered what happened to her at the time of her stroke. But I'm very grateful to report that my impairment was what the physical therapist said was minimal. For one thing, the Creator had provided that I would be left-handed. and the impairment was on the right side. That has come in very handy, pardon the pun. There were 3 weeks of occupational and physical therapy. There was a week or overnight of a oxygen monitor. That would have meant a CPAP if I didn't pass that test. There was a month heart monitor. What a nuisance. We're trying to avoid all the cell phone magnetic rays, and here it was. We're right close. But none of those reports have come back. Like Virginia, I passed all my tests. So now I want to say thank you to the Olive Tree family for your kind words, for your prayers, for your visits, your messages, for the phone calls and the meals. And I need to say thank you to Gilbert for all the dishes he washed. He's probably complained to some of you about dishpan hands. A few weeks ago, we had the Parsha Bo, and there was a statement in that Parsha that was of great comfort. It is in the 12th chapter of Exodus and verse 42 that says, "The